Okay, you're very welcome along to Wednesday Night Rugby. Delighted to say we have the Leinster coach, Stuart Lancaster, with us. Stuart, you're very welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Joe. Nice to be here.
I tell you what, you're a lucky man who earns his living in the outdoors on a training field on a day like today. I know it's not always like this, but on a day like today, you take it.
Oh, for sure, for sure. You're right. There's a few days in December and January when you're taking the boys out and it's lashing with rain, the wind's blowing. But no, the last few weeks have been amazing, really. And we're coming to the end now. It feels obviously a bit different playing rugby in June. The season's extended, as you know, and we'll start later next season. Start later in September, with a view to finals rugby being end of June, which has its positives, obviously, from a training point of view and the quality of the games and everything else because of the weather, but also clashes with a lot of other sporting activities as well. So I'm very mindful, thinking about that a lot at the moment, actually, with the Euro starting and certainly in the UK. I know there's, in England, there's a real battle for airtime, with rugby obviously fighting with the semi-finals and finals coming up and a whole host of other things starting at the same time.
So with that in mind, we reached out, we sort of set you a task, Lions versus South Africa on the horizon. Now, the first test isn't until the 24th of July, admittedly. And we sort of said, well, how do you beat South Africa, or how do you see this? And we sort of, I suppose, asked you to use your expertise, have a look at some tape, and hopefully give everyone a great insight and almost give us an insight too into how a professional goes about breaking down an opposition is kind of the plan here. Now, I should say as well, you're stressing you're not a disinterested party. There are Leinster players out there, so you don't want me asking you every 5 minutes to name who you'd start in that position or to try and wangle Lancaster's starting 15 here. That's not the objective, even though I'd quite like to know. That's not what we're doing here.
No, I think when you guys approached me, I thought it was quite a good. I thought it was a good idea. It was good for me because it made me go back to some of the footage that I'd analysed, back in the World Cup, because South Africa haven't played since the World Cup. So it forced me to go back and look at that, which was good for me and put me in the sort of what would I do if it was me situation. I've had a couple of chats with the Leinster lads who are going out there, so I can pass on some of the things that I've looked at, which has been good.
Right.
But also, I think the main outcome, really, if you want something from the next, 35, 40 minutes, however long it takes, is that if you're listening at home, then you come away less thinking about selection, more thinking about tactics and strategy. And hopefully, maybe, Joe, it might be an idea if I set the outline now about how I think it'll go, where I would try and beat South Africa, where I think the actual coaching team will go, because that's a different conversation, obviously. With Warren, and the Wales philosophy that they used against South Africa. Gregor's, Townsend got his influence. The personnel that they have available, that they've selected. And maybe further down the line, Joe, we have let's see what happened in the end, shall we?
That sounds great.
This is the appetizer, and hopefully particularly even if you're a non-rugby fan, it can give you a bit more of an insight of what to look out for.
Super. Sounds great. Well, let's dive in then. Our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone, sponsors of the Irish rugby team of us, everyone in. Give us a sense, first of all, which South African games have you looked at?
Yeah, so I went back to the Rugby Championship, which preceded the World Cup, and I watched the Australia-South Africa game and then the New Zealand-South Africa game, which was Rugby Championship Round 2. That was a 16-all draw, actually. South Africa scored on the last play. And then the World Cup, they played in the first pool game, which New Zealand won.
Mm.
And then the semi-final, when they beat Wales pretty much on the last play, or certainly in the last few minutes. The final, obviously the game against England, where they won the World Cup. And I also went back to the last time that Scotland played South Africa, just to get an insight into how did Gregor Townsend at that point try and build a game plan to beat South Africa. Now, South Africa won that game at Murrayfield, but not by a huge amount, and Scotland had a good crack. So that's the sort of overview I've taken. I'd actually done the work at the time, but I said this has sort of asked me to go back and look at it again. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, great. Now, I know South Africa have 30 of their World Cup squad, of their 33-man squad, 30 still available. So in terms of personnel, it will be quite similar. They haven't played in a long time. therefore, you're presuming that the South African approach we saw at the World Cup is going to be pretty similar to what we're going to see this summer. They're not going to pull some magic rabbit out of the hat somehow, I wouldn't think. No.
I think there's been 1 or 2 changes with the coaching team, but generally the main men are still the main men. So Rassie, although I think his title now is Director of Rugby.
Yeah.
And Jacques Nienaber is the head coach. But essentially, these are the 2 guys who came from Munster. So, with my Leinster hat on, we coached as Leinster against Munster against that coaching team during my first few years at Leinster. And having watched them evolve their game plan into South Africa, there's a lot of similarities, definitely, for sure.
Right.
And because the coaching team hasn't changed much and they haven't had a game in between time, I'm envisaging that, it'll be a similar game plan. We've got, obviously, the Lions have got some warm-up games themselves, so they've got those windows to get their game plan together.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, as you know, in these test series, it'll come down to the 3 test matches. And there's a whole variety of things that we could discuss, such as, playing at altitude, referees, etc., which I think we can talk about maybe secondary.
Okay.
The main point, really, I thought the best way to sort of format this would be, how will South Africa defend? As a consequence, what do we need to think about in terms of attack?
Mm-hmm.
And from a Lions point of view, and then we'll flip it around and say, how do you think South Africa will attack? And then as a consequence, what are the fundamentals that the Lions are going to need in place to defend? I think it's probably worth starting with the DNA of South Africa. I went there with England in 2012, and if I was to ask anyone what the DNA of the South African team would, it'd be about power. It'd be about intensity, physicality, very, very strong defence, very good set piece, incredibly big and athletic players with game changers as well. And that's back in my time, 2012. And if you took the Lions series in 2009, you'd say the same. And I don't think anything's changed really. So the first thing to understand is they have a very, very big, powerful side. They went 6-2 in the World Cup final, 6 forwards on the bench with 2 backs. They play a very, very aggressive defensive system. They have a lot of very tall athletes in the lineup, so they'll try and squeeze you at set piece time. And their strategy in defence is high risk, high reward, I would describe it as. So very high wingers, almost like what I would describe as an up and in defence, with the 15, Willie Leroux, closing hard as well. And then obviously then you've got these incredibly big athletes in between times. So the Lions are going to need to understand how to break down that type of defence first and foremost. And that's one of the keys, I think, to the success. And it's hitting the sweet spot between playing to space, and there is space on the outside of the high winger, and playing in behind them as well. So I don't think anyone who thinks the Lions are going to run it from everywhere and achieve success would be you'd be foolish, really, because that's a recipe for disaster. Equally, they've got such good counter-attackers in Colby and Leroux, etc., etc. Your kicking strategy needs to be effective as well. So, that'd be sort of an overview of their defensive system. But we can get into the nuances. If you
No, I'd love to, because we don't get into the nuances enough in the media, and this is the kind of eye that you're bringing to it, which is great. On a broad term, first of all, do you like that kind of South African defence? Do you rate it? The wingers being high feels like it's become very much in vogue in the last couple of years.
Yeah, if it's run well, it's very, very difficult to break down. Very difficult to break down, particularly when you've got intelligent wingers and you've got people like Faf de Klerk, who would often hold the edge. So if you imagine, you've got a line out, and the edge defender from the lineup will be Faf de Klerk, and then you'll have Mampipi or whoever they decide to select on the other wing. And you've also got that physicality of Delande in the middle and Arm, who are both very, very strong. Colby on the other wing, he would be very, very quick and athletic as well. So if you, and I've seen a lot of teams try to do this, where let's say, we're the Lions now, and we have a line out in their half, and what the South Africans will do, they will stack their line out with middle and tail with incredibly tall, big second rowers, Steph Toy, Khaleesi, Vermeulen, if he's fit, at the tail of the lineup and force you to go off the front. And then if you then come back down the short side, you're probably going to run into a brick wall. And if you go, sometimes like that would be what I call an 11 play. So you come from the line out to the middle, you come straight back down the short side, that'll be 11 play. Hit the middle, go around the corner once, come back, that'll be a 21 play. So 2 phases, 1 way, back the other way. So that's probably simple terminology if you understand.
Yeah.
And I've seen in all the games I watched, lots of teams have tried that. England tried it in the final, tried a 4-man early doors, and the ball then gets thrown into touch because you've got like Faf de Klerk who holds the edge, who's a really, really intelligent defender. So they're trying to force you into playing between the 15-metre lines, which then brings you into playing into the big South African physical, aggressive line speed defenders. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge because your ability to drive is going to be compromised because of the sheer size of the team. Yes. But there is definitely space on the outside, and I've seen teams take that space effectively, and that then puts that open side winger in a really difficult position because he's come high, he's come aggressive, and if you can get the ball outside him, you've then got Leroux coming high as well, which means there's an acre of space behind, an acre of space. And I would, if you were attacking against them early, I would look to sort of condense the South African forwards in a high-numbered line-out. I think like a 4-man or a 3-man line-out early doors, you just put more South African forwards in the back line, so you end up running into a big brick wall. So condense the forwards into a line-out and then try and play to the edge. And as Leroux comes up, put the ball in behind early doors and put indecision in his mind. Okay. And put indecision in the open side winger's mind.
So make Leroux think twice about rushing up as quickly next time.
Exactly. Because then you can exploit the space. Now, there's ways to exploit that space with different starter plays. You can kick it there, early doors, because often you'll see that winger. He'll be probably inside the 15-metre line, so there is all that space outside him. But Jacques has it to a T. The players are very, very good at it. So you have to be accurate. And one of the interesting selection decisions, without going into the personnel, is who are the players that are going to enable the Lions to get to that space? Because if you can get to that space and you can do it with either it's a kick or a starter play, which allows you to maybe hit the middle and go to the edge and expose that winger. And if Leroux comes up, you put the ball in behind. If he doesn't come up, then you take the edge. If you can do that, then you're on the front foot and you're piling down the wing. Leroux's coming across to make the final tackle. The blindside wing's coming over. All the South African forwards, big heavy forwards, having to run back. You're moving onto the ball with your athletic, Currys and Falataus and Jack Conans. They're coming onto the ball, and suddenly you can gain a lot of momentum that way. Same off scrums. I'd say their scrum defence would be very, very similar, quite aggressive, almost like what I'll describe as a swing defence. So again, that outside centre and upside wing would be high. There are ways to break down those types of defences. And again, you would put yourself in the ascendancy if you could take the edge and then have your forwards running onto the ball while the South African forwards are running back from the scrum. The scrum itself, we could talk about ad nauseum really, because if you think of the World Cup final, Carl Sinclair got injured in the first 5 minutes, and the game was won on lots of reasons, which I'll come on to. But one of the main reasons it was won was because of the loss of Kyle early on and the damage that South Africa impacted to the England scrum and the penalties that ensued. And you give South Africa a series of penalties, then you're either kicking 3 points, the kick in the corner, the driving, the picking and going, and you're trying to stop a lot of very big athletic carriers. So getting good scrum ball will be key for the Lions. Not necessarily, you don't have to be dominant, but you just need good channel one, clean ball, bang, go on, play to space, get them moving around, or kick to space, and then create indecision in that backfield. So the sweet spot between playing to space and playing exposing the backfield I think will be one of the critical things in breaking down that type of defence.
Okay. So heading for that space, if we see a Lions team or any team against South Africa trucking it up the middle, something's gone pretty wrong. They're not going to have much joy there.
Well, it's no, but that's a strategy, Joe, that the team could employ. You know, I mean, if you want to take on a power team, you've got two methods of doing it in my mind. You play the game of movement, and you move them around, and you exploit the backfield space, and you keep them moving that way. Or you take them on in the power game, and you play a kicking game, you play a territory game, and you know you take it up the middle, you come back to the 10, who bangs it up in the air, and you put it on, you know, Colby's head or LaRue's head. They're not huge guys.
Yeah.
You contest the ball, and you take your chances, you know, in the power and territory game. Now that's the intriguing thing that I think we'll all need to study. Well, there's a couple of things. One is the selection, you know, and I would probably look at it and say, back row wise, they've gone athletic, quick, mobile. But centres wise, you know, with Elliot Daly and Harris being the 13s and not a Ringrose or a Slade, it's slightly more conservative in the backline. I think one of the key things in breaking this type of defence down is high levels of skill, high levels of understanding, good running lines, and critically, 2 ball players in your backline, ideally 3.
So you would have liked a bit more creativity in the centres, I'm thinking.
If that's the way they're going to play. Now, okay. I'll come back to the point. So Wales in the semi-final went with, they're going to kick, because South Africa's, I'll come on to South Africa's attack in a minute. South Africa's attack is very much based on territory, field position, power, and they nearly beat New Zealand on both those games I watched by playing that game, that style. New Zealand got absolutely smashed behind the game line time and time again. And it was only the individual skill and brilliance of some of the New Zealand players that got them the win on both occasions. Okay. So I think, you know, Warren Gatland with Wales in the semi-final went toe for toe on the kicking game, and very, very nearly pulled it off. You know, I think it was 16-all, like on 78 minutes, and it came down to a penalty that you could argue could have gone both ways. Really, it certainly wasn't. It was harsh against Wales, I felt at the time, and Pollard kicks it, and then they're into a World Cup final, and everyone forgets that. You know, that how that game played out, because everyone was swept away by the England-New Zealand game, which was a complete contrast. But then I go back and look at Scotland against South Africa and the way Gregor approached it. That would be the really interesting thing to look out for in what's the attacking philosophy within the coaching team. How does that evolve? You know, are we going to go power, percentages, field position? But you know, when you look at the Lions pack compared to South Africans, and look at some of the back row and the front, well, all of them really. There's some critical matchups, you know, in the scrum. The line-out callers, I think, for the Lions are absolutely key, you know. And I'm looking at, you know, you've got Henderson, you've got Itoje. You know, there's not many others who run line-outs for their country. Back row wise, you know, you've got Tag, Byrne, Courtney Laws can play 6. You've not got many out-and-out athletic 6s who are tall and would add value to the lineup. You know, you've got a Tom Curry, you've got Hamish Watson, you've got Sam Simmons, you've got Jack and Toby Faletau at 8. You've got Tipperick, you know, who else is a good lineup option. But you get my point. You know, that bit of, it's a combination of the coach's philosophy. I guess what I'm trying to say, a combination of the coach's philosophy, which we'll still have to see what that is, and maximising the talent they have available.
Yes. And Stuart, what did Gregor Townsend, if you could briefly describe it, what did he try and do? We know what Gatland tried to do in 19 in that semi-final. What was the Townsend approach to try and break down that South African defence? And did it work?
Definitely did to a point. I think South Africa improved from the game they played then. But I think that Gregor's was more to, right, let's try and attack that space on the outside.
Okay.
Finn Russell was playing, I think they went for a crossfield kick to exploit the space early. They moved the South Africans around and they caused them trouble. And knowing Gregor as I do, I'll be surprised if he doesn't bring that to the party.
And
And I think selection-wise, the team's probably set up to play that way. Bar the selection in the centres, I think. And Robbie can play at 13, obviously.
Yeah.
I'd certainly trust Robbie to be able to play that role with an Owen Farrell at 12. And a Dan Bigger at 10 or a Finn Russell at 10. But that'll be the interesting thing to look out for.
Yeah. And listening to you there, am I right in saying you would lean more towards the Gregor Townsend approach personally than the Gatland approach?
Yeah, that's just I'd be definitely more that way inclined. For a couple of reasons. I mean, I think a coach's philosophy is shaped by a lot of different things, and mine has been shaped by the coaches who influenced me. The style of rugby that I enjoyed playing in, the style of rugby I've enjoyed coaching, the success we've had at, say, Leinster, but probably based also on the personnel. Like at Leinster, for example, we're not, we're a big team, but we're not a power team.
Yeah.
And we play the game of movement, and we play the game of movement. When we play a Munster or like when Razzie was there, we'd play to space. We'd move the ball around and we'd back ourselves to do that. Now, that's also in Leinster's DNA. I think Leinster, if you go back through the history, and I think so, it's probably a culmination of the three things: the personnel we have, the philosophy of the coach, and the DNA of the team. Now, with the Lions, you've got obviously the personnel is the personnel that's been selected. The philosophy will be decided, and you'll see that evolve during the warm-up games, I'm sure. I can't help but think Gregor's influence will lean more towards that way. I think selection, let's say, is probably shown that. And then, if you talk about the DNA of the Lions, you wouldn't say there was a specific one, but you'd say, going back to New Zealand and Australia, those last two tours, when people really got on the feet, it was when they moved the ball, wasn't it? And when
it's amazing.
And when they, you go back to Sean O'Brien's try against New Zealand. So I think they will. That's what I think they'll do.
Yes. Well, it would be, without going using too strong a word, it would probably be a touch foolish on Gatland's behalf to go to the trouble of bringing Gregor Townsend, of picking players like Russell, to then ask them to play that maybe more reductive style that Wales played in the semi-final. That's just going to cause conflict and consternation. You need to be on the same page largely, and they're such different approaches. You would think Gatland has said, okay, I'm happy to let you take charge here, Gregor, as opposed to bringing Gregor Townsend out to, carry the bibs and just nod his head.
Yeah, no, but I think to be fair to Wales in the semi-final, the first thing they did was go to Bigger, who went for a crossfield kick to expose that space on the upside wing. So it wasn't like Wales didn't try and play at all. Yes. But it was just the way that it was an arm wrestle type game, and it seemed such a contrast to the England-New Zealand game, which was, but that's the beauty of rugby, isn't it? There's no one style that's always going to win. Probably other points just to think about in terms of South Africa's defensive system or South Africans personnel or whatever else. When you get close to their line, there was this period in the World Cup final where England, just before half-time, were absolutely going hammer and tong at the line. And they held them out and held them out and held them. The physicality that South Africans showed at the time. I don't know if you get a chance to see the Chase in the Sun documentary. And Vermeulen was interviewed afterwards, and he said, you draw a line in the sand and you defend everything that's behind it, and you're defending your family, your country. And he spoke so well and so passionately about that period of defence. Yes. That when the Lions get close to the line, they're going to need, I think, variety in the lineup, because I think they're just going to get the ball and drive them over the line. It's so hard to do nowadays, particularly against such a big side. Variety in the lineup, and obviously really clinical execution in that sort of 5 to 10 metre zone outside of the try line, and England tried, and came away with nothing. It was such a pivotal moment in the World Cup final when South Africa defended that. So they're things that, like, as a coach, I'll be thinking of strategies and ways in which we can come away with points in those areas by having variety.
And I do want to move on to talk about the Lions' defence and the South African attack. Just a question: why do you think, based on your read on the back rowers they picked and the athleticism they picked there, why do you think they didn't take a smidgen more creativity in the centres, or an extra ball player in the centres?
I think they like Chris Harris as a defensive 13. I think he's he's good, very good defender.
Right.
I think Elliot Daly has a lot of credit on the back of obviously the last two. He hasn't played a lot of 13 in the last 4 years. He played a lot of fullback, not as a lot of 13. His long range goal kicking, I think, at altitude, he's banging them over from 60 meters. Elliot Daly. Whether they'll find a spot for him in the team or on the bench, that'll be, we'll wait and see. I do think, with Bundy and Robbie, you have got an ability to play Robbie at 13. And I would certainly, I wouldn't worry about that at all. I think Robbie can be a really world-class 13 as well. And I think, when you go back to the last tour, when Johnny played at 10 and Owen Farrell played at 12, I thought that looked a really more effective combination in the second and third test. I can see, you go back three-wise, I think the aerial contest in the back three is critical. I say we'll move on to South Africa's attack, but who, in an ideal world, for me, you'd have like a really good footballing 15. Now, Stuart Hogg obviously can play that role, and he'd be probably pole position. So I think he's got a critical role to play. But who they play on the wings, and because there is no doubt that the Faf de Klerk, is a very good box kicker, and he does it a lot. If not, they go back to Pollard, who bangs it up in the air.
Yeah.
And if they're not doing that, then they're driving the line out. But Delandy's carrying into, Bigger or Farrell, whoever's in the 10 channel, and then you've got probably Vermeulen or Steph du Toit coming charging around the corner. And you have to be able to defend those attacks with effective two-man tackles. So how Steve Stanley sets up the defence, will be interesting, because I don't think people give South Africa the credit they deserve for what they did in the final by exposing the backfield in the final against England. So the opportunities that came that ultimately resulted in them winning the game, you could argue were based on the scrum and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, sorry to interrupt. I suspect I'm in that camp that doesn't give them enough credit, because as the years have gone on now, if you were to say, how did South Africa win the final? All I have for you is, well, they killed them at the scrum and Colby got a kind of cool try at the end. That was it. Yeah, and I'm sure that's not giving them enough credit.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I thought they played a lot more rugby than people have given them credit.
Okay.
I thought Willie Leroux in the final was excellent, and Pollard was excellent, working off the ball. But what they did really well, they saw space in the backfield. They kicked and exploited that space in the backfield, which then forced England to kick out, which then led to South African pressure through line out, or kick in, and then you give in Colby and Crow, a counter-attack opportunity, and talking seriously good athletes here. And then in between times, you've got this pressure game building. You get caught in the back of a tackle because you've not dominated the collision, because there's a big man running at you, and suddenly it's 3 points, and Pollard just keeps banging them over, and the score becomes 3-6-9, and a couple of scrum penalties. But no, I think South Africa, particularly in the final, I thought they played really well. I did.
So when it comes to how the Lions are going to counter all that, then again, the very basic understanding a lot of us would have about the options in defence. I mean, we'd all get very focused on things like, well, line speed, how high the wingers are, as you've mentioned, or not, and therefore how many people are in the backfield or not. They'd be kind of the basics in defence that we would play around with. So when you're talking about how the Lions counter South Africa, what the Lions do in defence, what are the big things you're looking forward to see? Like, what's the big question mark for them to decide on?
So I think you've got to understand that line speed comes from defensive width. If you don't have defensive width, then you can't generate line speed, because if you come rushing up and then they've got good enough players just to sort of beat you on the edge, because you're all tight. So you need defensive width. So you need numbers on feet. South Africans probably have a reputation of, like, Francois Lowe would be very good over the ball, and but they've not actually got that many, South Africa, what I'll call poached threats, as many as you'd think.
Right.
If Coetzee comes in, from Marcel Coetzee from Ulster, he's a serious poach threat, but the others less so. So I'll be really interested to see a couple of things. One, how aggressive the Lions go at the defensive ruck. So a Tom Curry or a Tipperick or a Hamish Watson, how much license are they given to go hard at the defensive ruck and try and stop them at source?
Because right away there, my thought would be, well, if you're saying South Africa don't have a lot of jacklers, then that's something the Lions should really target so they can obliterate them there. Is it as simple as that?
Well, I think it's probably talking about two slightly different things.
Okay.
I don't think South Africa will go too hard at the defensive breakdown because they want numbers on feet to get the defensive width to get the line speed.
Yes.
For the Lions' defence, I think that how they construct their defence and who they hold in the backfield is the key. So in the World Cup final, England, on a couple of occasions, just left Elliot Daly in the backfield. And South Africa were absolutely quick flash to see that and left Elliot Daly chasing the ball and with a lot of pressure coming on the kick chase. So I think you need to have two in the backfield. It'd be interesting to see who those two are. And I'll give you for example. So some teams on a box kick, when you're box kicking out of your own half, they would leave the number 8 in the backfield with the fullback, and the 9 would chase. England did that in the final. Scotland do that sometimes. And it'd be interesting to see Steve Tandy, what he does with the number 8 on that type of scenario. It'll be interesting to see who they leave in the backfield. If there's 2 in the backfield, and I think there will be 2 in the backfield, because if you leave 1, then the South Africans are too good to see it. Who are those 2 players? Is it the 9 and the 15? Is it the 10 and 15? Is it a winger in the 15? Which means obviously if you've got 2 in the backfield, 13 in the front line, 2 men in the tackle, that's 11 in the front line. Now, if you've got 11 in the front line and you can go hard and pressure, I think they can cause problems. But if they don't get the right numbers on feet, South Africa can easily dent them by carrying hard. Rather than being a 2-man tackle, it's a 1.5-man tackle.
Yes.
It's across the gain line, and then it's hard to play. If South Africa reach a point where they feel like they're going nowhere, they will bang it in the air, and the 2 people who are in the backfield need to be good. Because when you start looking at the back 3 selection, you've got Watson, Liam Williams, Louis Rees-Zammit, obviously very young. You've got Hogg there. I can't help but feel that Liam Williams' experience as a fullback and a winger will help him, and Anthony Watson as well. I can't help but feel, but that's probably the likely makeup of the back 3 for that reason, really.
Yes, and I don't know how much. I'm sure things are totally different to 12 years ago, but if you're talking DNA and those things, you think of Rob Kearney having this breakout tour 12 years ago and sailing through the air and taking all those high balls,
Yeah. But I mean, you look at, so Pollard's key for them, but they picked Mornay Steyn, who played in that series.
Yeah, saw that.
So, he's 36 years old now, but there's a reason why, because Pollard is so far ahead and Mornay Steyn is still producing the goods in that way that the South Africans can play. That'll be interesting. I think how the Lions outside centres, again, come back to the same point really. How they defend and marshal the edges will be important. The position of the wingers, but the physicality. It's ultimately, it's down to the fundamentals of the game as well, Joe. You know what I mean? It's down to, we can have all the systems we want in the world, but we have to be able to front up and make our tackles. We've got to be able to stop them on the gain line. We've got to pressure their box kick. We've got to pressure their kicking game.
Yes.
We've got to deal with the aerial threat well. We've got to defend more well. We've got to scrum well. When they come close to our line, when they're coming in their threes, and there's 3 massive, but we've got to be able to stop them, from getting over the line. And we've got to do this time and time and time again.
And how does the Lions squad measure up in that department?
I think they can definitely do it. I mean, I think if, again, what will be the priority when you're coming together? Get your set piece right. Make sure you've got your defence rock solid and a real good understanding of what the defensive system is. And then you can, during the sort of warm-up games, you can layer on the detail in your attack. But for me, I think with knowing Robin well, as I do, Robin McBride, obviously he's going to be out there. I think he'll have the forwards really well organised. I think the Lions will be very good line-out defence-wise. I think there's a lot of good callers and guys who are very effective in line-out defence. I think with the likes of Tadhg Beirne and those lot, they've got some very good poach threats as well. So I think they will go probably hard at that defensive breakdown. But the trick is to go hard, but not reckless, where you're putting 2, 3, 4 men in, not coming out with the ball, and then suddenly you're dealing with a whole sea of problems.
Yes.
So the decision making at the defensive breakdown will be key. But no, I think the Lions can definitely win the series. But there's a lot. It's a serious challenge, and part of the challenge, I think, when you look at the actual schedule, is the limited time the coaches have to build this sort of unconscious understanding that everyone's going to need. The Wednesday, Saturday nature of the warm-up games, where you can't tell me you're not going to pick up injuries and bumps and bruises, and there's going to be lads arriving who've not been in the Lions squad at the moment, and then you play, I think it's the first game at Cape Town, the second 2 at altitude in Joburg.
Correct.
So, I remember I actually went back and looked at the Ireland tour in 2016, and Ireland had a really good series against South Africa, but it was the Joburg test that Ireland were winning and could have won in the second test that I think South Africa just edged them, and they were so fatigued at the end of that game from playing, end of a long hard season, etc., etc. So, there's a lot of ifs, buts, and maybes.
There's a question I often ask our pundits, and it's kind of a tricky answer. So I'm going to put this to you because I'm sure you've been in this position. If you're involved in a game and the scrum is suffering quite badly, take the World Cup final, take any number of games. I mean, I know Saracens, the Leinster match not so long ago, that happened. As a coaching ticket and as tacticians and decisions in terms of how you're playing, is there anything you can do in terms of let's change our style of play to, in some ways, at least negate the fact that we're getting killed at scrum? Or if you're getting killed at scrum, is it just good night and good luck, and it's really, really hard? Is it that simple sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can't avoid scrums if there's a knock on. It's not like you can say, "Oh, we'll opt for a line out here, ref."
Yeah.
So there is going to be scrums in the game. If you are under pressure, without stating the obvious, you want to get a good engagement and you want to get the ball in and out and gone.
Yes.
So it is possible to do that, definitely.
But there's no guaranteed way to. I mean, knock-ons are going to happen. There's no way to limit the number of scrums in a game with your tactics.
Not really. Not really. I mean, obviously you can choose to have a line out over a scrum, near the line or whatever. But generally,
it's a tough afternoon.
It's tough, yeah. But again, I don't know. It was a big factor in the final, but it wasn't the only factor by a long way. And I thought Wales did pretty well in the scrum against them in the semi-final, to be honest.
Okay. The referees have been announced, and I know you said this was kind of secondary. Rugby in particular, more than most sports we cover, there's like who's the referee? In football matches, no one even knows who the referee is half the time. So in rugby, it's obviously a bigger deal. Nick Berry, the Australian, is going to do that first test in Cape Town. Ben O'Keefe, a Kiwi, is going to do the second test, and Matthew Reynal is going to do the third test. What effect will those three have in the game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching Super Rugby at the moment, and if you watch some games in the Northern Hemisphere, it's like sometimes watching two different sports. So I hope that they are consistent throughout. The worry is you've got one style one week and a different style the second week and a different one the third week. And it's so hard for a coach to prepare in that way. So I think because they are in a bubble, the referees, I do think there'll be a lot of work done. And the fundamentals for me that the referee needs to get right, that we should be looking at, is how's he refereeing the defensive breakdown? Is he getting the tackler out the way And if they are going to jackal the ball, is the jackal illegal? And that's the key thing, because often that gets missed. And as a consequence, you get this slow, turgid game, which I don't think will really suit the Lions.
Okay.
I think the Lions, if they are to beat South Africa, they need to play the smart kicking game with the game of movement. They've got to nail the set piece moments, obviously, and be strong defensively in the fundamentals games we talked about. But I think a referee that allows, really not illegal, but if they're pushing the boundaries and that defensive ruck all the time, and he doesn't deal with that, I think that could play into South Africa's hand. And I think the Southern Hemisphere refs are good at that, because they generally want to see high ball in play, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope for consistency. But yeah, there will be factors. There will be factors. But again, be interested to see in the warm-up games how they are refed, because that'll give you a good indication about how the main games will go.
One last point as a coach, and then you can do your kind of final summary I wanted to put to you. We're seeing a lot of red cards at the moment, and high tackles, there's zero tolerance. And, Champions Cup final, Bodia, Robbie Henshaw tackled high against Ulster that day and kind of got away with it, but it was a high tackle. Would you now, as a coach, going out on a tour like this, and even day to day now, are you at a point where you're trying to almost say, look, fellas, unfortunately, the high tackle is too risky. You red card, you're gone, we're goosed. Are you kind of trying to get the high tackle out of the game? Or in certain instances, are you still saying to the players, yeah, look, high tackle there is kind of the right thing to do. That really helps us out. Where are you on that now?
No. You never really coach nowadays to tackle high, really. Okay. You coach, a two-man tackle, because clearly if you've got powerful athletes coming at you, then two men are better than one. But you definitely don't want to be put in a situation where you're encouraging your team to tackle high all the time. Because, as you say, you're a millimetre away from the guy dropping his height on the basis of carrying the ball, and you've hit him high, and then suddenly, you're off. And, if you go back to the Lions in 2017, Sonny Bill Williams gets sent off, doesn't he, in that second test? And that the Lions won that, and then suddenly it's game on for the third. So those pivotal moments, you're right, the series could swing on. I've talked about all the technical stuff. It could swing on something completely different, and it could be you lose a tight head prop in the first 5 minutes, or your key ball player is sent off because of a high tackle which wasn't intentional.
You'd be amazed if there's not a red card here, just given all the emotion and
it's not just the emotion; it's just the
intensity, I suppose.
Again, make it very difficult sometimes, to avoid. Everyone is told to tackle low, but sometimes, you're going low and the guy dips at the wrong time, and so no one's going out with that intention, and certainly none of the players will be coached that way by any of the coaches. So
okay.
But it just.
And is it a point of emphasis? I mean, I get the point. You're not coaching anyone to tackle high, but are you now maybe more than you were a couple of years ago, almost emphasizing tackle low, got to be careful. That has become a point of emphasis, right? Interesting.
Yeah. I would say, I've not spoken to coaches from other teams, but I would say 100% that's the case.
Yeah. So do you want to give us your kind of overarching thoughts? I'm sure we didn't get to everything, and it's very complicated, and I'm sure you'd love a little chalkboard where you could draw tactics out for us. You've given us a great sense there of both attacks and both defenses.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, like I say, hopefully people listening, it's, even if you're a layman, sort of a layperson rugby fan, and you're just trying to get a flavour for it. When I watch games, try and watch the game from the helicopter view. That's my point to people. Let's try and have a look, rather than just follow the ball when the game's on. Let's try and look at where are the wingers? What's the backfield? Why is the space in the backfield? How are the Lions going to set about breaking down this unbelievably aggressive defensive system? How are the Lions going to deal with the power game? What they're going to do with the aerial threat? But equally, what will be equally fascinating is how are the Lions coaches going to set this team up to win this test series? Because yes, they've got great players, but it's the combination of great players and great coaches. And if they can achieve it, it will be without doubt an amazing series win. Because I know people could say, well, South Africa played since the World Cup. All those players who are listed in the South African squad are playing in Super Rugby at the moment, and there's not many, but most of them are playing in Europe. And whether it's in France, whether it's in England, whether it's in obviously the Pro 14, we've got lads over here. So it's not like they're not match hardened battle hardened, and there's a real knowledge as well, I think, that Razzie brings of Northern Hemisphere rugby from his time at Munster. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating, really. But hopefully, I've set the scene for people to start thinking about it a bit more. Try and take the emotion away from selection, everyone, please. I know we all want all the Ireland players to get picked, but it's never easy as a coach, is it? So I'm sure they'll pick whoever thinks the best. But I think they should pick the team that suits the style they want to play.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope they're playing that more movement style that you're talking about than a repeat of Wales, South Africa in the semi-final, I've got to be honest. One last point, apropos of nothing, but it's come up a bit on the show this week, and I suspect it was part of your thinking when you were saying that you're not a fan of the captain's challenge. It's just about how long the game is taking now. So like the Champions Cup final first half took 52 minutes. And I didn't see Cardiff Zebra the other night, but the second half, I had to double check this. The second half of Cardiff Zebra the other night took 67 minutes. Yeah. The TMO and the referee were speaking for 23 minutes. There were 7 TMOs. The captain's challenge was part of that, but it's not the sole reason. And this stop-start nature to the game at times, it's not the greatest spectacle as a viewer, 2-hour marathons. Are you of the opinion that we need to speed up the game? And if so, how? Because there's a lot of factors between resetting scrums, and injuries are unavoidable, and TMO decisions do happen. And, I don't know. What are your thoughts on all that?
I think, captain's challenge for me has really affected that massively. So you've got another tier of challenge. I think that I think that should go, and I think we've only had that in the Rainbow Cup. So please, let's put that one to bed. Yeah. I was watching some of the English Premiership games at the weekend, like London Irish played Wasps 39-36. Leicester played Bristol, although there was some controversy at the end. These games were, Exeter was a great game. They were fast flowing, there was little stoppages. There was a constant narrative between the TMO and the referee. So not like this big, right, you need to check that. He runs over to a screen. He looks at the screen. We have a 5-minute conversation. He runs back. No, there's nothing to look at. I think that's the model, really. So I think it is possible. I think we are probably slightly tainted by the captain's challenge thing in the rugby that we've seen recently. And certainly the rugby I've been involved in. Since that captain's challenge came in. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that people have really seen the worst side of how that can affect the game, and as a consequence, referees and TMOs will minimise their involvements until the essential stuff, but also coaches and players respect the fact that referees sometimes might not get everything right all the time, but for the betterment of the game, then we need to allow them to referee with fluidity and empathy. Rather than uber technical, because you can stop a game for every breakdown, really, if you want to.
Sure, yeah. So
there's got to be an empathy for the game, but we as coaches and players need to accept that if we want that way, then they might not get 100% right all the time, but we take the rough with the smooth.
Super. Listen, I really enjoyed that. It was great to get a sense of how you see this whole thing and the various options to the coaching staff. Really enjoyed it. And next week, Lancaster picks his starting 15. Thanks so much, Stuart. Really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Okay. Cheers, Joe.